The moment will be replayed for years, not because voices were raised or tempers exploded, but because truth finally entered a room built to avoid it. When Jamie Raskin calmly leaned forward and pressed play, the hearing stopped being political theater and became a turning point in history as the unmistakable voice of Jeffrey Epstein filled the chamber, raw and undeniable, leaving no space for spin or denial, and forcing everyone present to confront what had long been whispered but never formally acknowledged. The audio wasn't just evidence of past crimes. It was proof that the system had known far more than it ever admitted. And when Raskin turned toward Kash Patel and asked why investigations had slowed, why leads vanished, why powerful names were never pursued with urgency, the silence that followed spoke louder than any confession. As Patel drifted into bureaucratic language about procedures and interagency reviews, the familiar fog used when truth becomes dangerous. Analysts watching instantly recognized the pattern. Not a cover-up with one order, but a machine of delay designed to exhaust justice through paperwork, approvals, and endless process until public attention faded. And within hours, former investigators began confirming that whenever cases pointed toward elite financial or political circles, pressure followed, not to stop the case outright, but to be cautious, a word that only seemed to apply when powerful people were involved. The Epstein audio transformed years of suspicion into undeniable reality, showing that corruption didn't operate through dramatic interference, but through institutional friction that quietly buried accountability. And public reaction erupted as clips spread worldwide, trust in oversight collapsed, and citizens began asking what other investigations had been slowed, what other victims had been ignored, and how many powerful figures had been shielded by silence. Raskin closed with a warning that democracies don't fall in explosions, but erode when truth becomes optional and justice becomes selective. Because when power receives protection and ordinary people receive consequences, institutions stop serving the public and start serving influence. And the most chilling realization settled in that Epstein wasn't just a criminal scandal, but proof of a system that quietly bends for wealth and connections. The recording didn't just expose one man's crimes, it exposed years of institutional failure. And now that the curtain had been pulled back, investigations were expanding, pressure was mounting, and silence was no longer enough, because once evidence enters the light, it can't be buried again. And the most dangerous thing for corruption had finally happened. The public was paying attention, demanding answers, and refusing to let the truth disappear into process ever again. Former agents began coming forward anonymously, describing how entire task forces had been quietly reassigned, how promising leads were suddenly labeled outside scope, how subpoenas were slowed until momentum died, and how anyone who pushed too hard found their careers stalled or transferred into obscurity. Legal analysts explained that this wasn't incompetence, it was design. A slow-motion neutralization of justice that left no fingerprints while achieving the same result as outright obstruction. Across the country, hearings were called, watchdog groups filed emergency lawsuits, and journalists began mapping timelines that now made horrifying sense, showing years where progress mysteriously froze whenever cases brushed too close to wealth, politics, or global influence. Families of victims spoke publicly for the first time, describing how they had been told to be patient while files gathered dust, unaware that the system itself was quietly choosing who deserved justice and who didn't. The narrative shifted overnight. This was no longer about Epstein alone. It was about how power had learned to hide in procedure, how corruption had evolved from crude bribery into sophisticated delay, how institutions meant to protect citizens had become shields for the untouchable. Experts warned that what the public was witnessing was the collapse of the old illusion, the belief that the law moved equally for everyone. And once that belief cracks, societies change fast. Trust evaporates. Oversight intensifies. Demands for reform grow louder and less patient. What terrified many inside government wasn't the audio itself. It was what would come next. Bank records, communication logs, archived case notes, internal memos that had never been meant for daylight. Because now, every stalled investigation was being reopened with new eyes, every delay questioned, every closed file reconsidered, and the public wasn't going away this time. The exposure had triggered something far more powerful than outrage: sustained scrutiny, the kind corruption fears most. Because systems can survive scandals.
And as more evidence prepared to surface, one truth became unavoidable. The greatest threat to powerful networks had finally arrived. Not politics, not speeches, not even prosecutions, but millions of citizens watching, connecting dots, demanding accountability, and refusing to accept silence as an answer ever again. Once that happens, secrecy stops working. And when secrecy dies, so does unchecked power. Across institutions, the ripple effects were already being felt. Internal audits were launched. Oversight committees demanded archived records that had not been touched in years. Whistleblower hotlines flooded with new testimonies from people who had stayed quiet out of fear, but now felt protected by public momentum. Each voice added another missing piece to a puzzle that was finally coming into focus. What once looked like isolated failures now revealed a coordinated pattern. Investigations paused at the same stages, reports edited with the same vague language, accountability deferred with the same bureaucratic excuses. Analysts explained that this was how modern influence survived, not by breaking laws loudly, but by bending systems quietly until justice simply ran out of time. And the public was learning fast. Citizens began tracking timelines, comparing court filings, sharing financial trails, and questioning narratives that had once gone unchallenged. Independent journalists built massive open-source databases, mapping connections that traditional reporting had never fully explored. The internet had become a decentralized watchdog, one that couldn't be silenced with pressure or buried with paperwork. Former officials admitted off-record that what frightened powerful interests most wasn't a single investigation, it was sustained attention. Because scandals fade, outrage cools, but public awareness, once awakened, changes behavior permanently. It forces transparency, it disrupts influence, it makes secrecy impossible to maintain. Victims' families said for the first time they felt heard. Advocates pushed for reforms with real teeth, automatic evidence releases, independent prosecutors for high-profile cases, hard limits on classified delays. Lawmakers who had once avoided the issue now rushed to align themselves with accountability, sensing the political shift happening in real time. And beneath it all was a realization that reshaped everything. Corruption doesn't collapse when it's accused, it collapses when it's observed, because hidden systems rely on public distraction more than public approval. Now that the distraction was gone, the machinery of influence began grinding under its own weight. Every document became a liability. Every delay raised suspicion. Every closed door drew cameras. The era of quiet control was ending. What replaced it wasn't chaos, it was scrutiny. And scrutiny is relentless. It doesn't sleep, it doesn't forget. It doesn't move on just because officials hope it will. This was no longer one scandal. It was a reckoning with how power had operated in the shadows for decades. And as more truths continued rising to the surface, one final lesson became clear. When citizens stay watching, systems are forced to change. When transparency becomes constant, corruption becomes impossible to sustain. And once a society learns where to look for hidden power, it never goes blind again.